Hi everyone, a very warm welcome to today's session. I'm Professor Sally Eaves. Welcome to IPv6, Are We There Yet? Challenges in Bridging the Digital Divide, a subject really close to heart for everyone on the panel today. And today we're really trying to shine a light, I would say, on the connection between connectivity and bridging this global digital divide that's affected so many people, particularly over the last 18 months, and particularly, of course, underserved communities right across the world. We all believe that the time is now to really shift gears and redouble our efforts around this to really meet the promise of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And these are very, very interconnected. But one for all of us, I think, that's taken on renewed visibility is that of inclusive education for every single one of us. Really, I think that should be a basic human right. And putting this into context, 2/3 of the world's people today at school age, so 3 to 17 years of age, 1.3 billion children don't have internet at their own homes. And obviously, that's a huge barrier for educational development and later on for future careers development too. We also have huge gaps in connectivity and internet access persisting from regional to city centres, for example. So 72% of households in urban areas have access to home internet, 38% when we move to rural. And also 50%, according to new Ericsson research, of the world's population is still waiting for reliable broadband access. So we need to make a difference here. And that's what we want to do, really come together and make collective action for change. And one of the things that maybe isn't spoken about as much is around the role of critical infrastructure in bridging this gap. We want to put that center stage, especially putting a spotlight on the role of core network technology that often is very invisible. So we want to make invisible visible, put that center stage, and particularly issues such as the exhaustion of IPv4 addresses and the vital transition to IPv6. So to do this, I'm with some fantastic experts from A10, Chris and Terry. So Terry Young is the Director of Service Providing Product Management and Marketing. So welcome to the show, Terry.
Thank you very much, Sally. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And secondly, we have Chris James Killer, who is VP of Global Strategic Accounts at A10. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hi, nice to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I think maybe if we start with Terry with the first question. So as we've really set the stage here, bridging this digital divide is a global imperative today. And the statistics, I think, in that introduction really bring to the fore just how vital this is. And again, we care about this very deeply. So perhaps we could explore the role of A10 here, and in particular, this issue around the transition between IPv4 to IPv6, how that is playing a role, how critical infrastructure is an enabler for change. So let's kind of make that invisible visible, shall we say?
Sure. Thanks, Sally. Bridging the digital divide is not just an issue between developed countries and developing or undeveloped countries. It's also an issue within developed countries. In the United States, for example, there's about 22 million to some say as high as 43 million households that don't have any kind of a broadband connectivity. So that's really and the pandemic has really put a spotlight, on this issue and really created a lot of social and political will to change things, to get things done. Just in the last few years, there's been a number of rural broadband initiatives in the U.S., a lot of funding coming from Congress and also on its way through Congress. So there's been a real spotlight now that wasn't there even a couple of years ago. And I'm just struck, just going to industry conferences, at how much the conversation has changed. Whereas before it would have been, can we do this? Should we do this? And is it worth doing it? To now, well, of course we have to do this. Of course it's necessary. And now, how to go about it? What's the best way to go about it? And one of those small things that's the how that's not really talked about are some of these areas within the core network, as opposed to the access that's getting built out and gets all the attention, but the areas within the core network that make a lot of that connectivity possible once the traffic gets to them. And IPv4 and IPv6 is one of those areas. I can maybe give just a little bit of background on what that is, and maybe some people in the audience that don't really know quite what we're talking about with IPv4 and IPv6. So every connected device has to have an internet address. This lets the servers in the internet know where to send the traffic, to and from. And the original IP addressing scheme was called IP version 4. That's Internet Protocol version 4. And quite some time ago, it was really recognized that we don't have enough IPv4 addresses because the internet's becoming more popular, more and more devices being connected. So about 20 years ago, IP version 6 was introduced as a draft standard, and it expands the addressing space by over 1,000 times. So the basic issue for service providers that are providing connectivity people is that these two protocols are not backward compatible. So now you have a hybrid environment where you have devices that are IPv4 only and websites that are IPv4 only, some are IPv6, and the two have to be able to connect to each other and communicate, because the service provider wants to provide connectivity to everyone, to everywhere. So they have to manage that complexity, within their network. And for many of the smaller providers that are now being given funding, for example, they may not necessarily have addresses. The larger companies have already taken care of this, some time ago. And there's lots of mechanisms to actually make this possible. So kind of the situation we're in right now is that about a third of traffic is IPv6 and 2/3 is still IPv4. And most websites are still IPv4, and that's after 20 years of the standard being introduced. So adoption is increasing, but it's not 100%. And so it's still a mixed environment that operators have to manage. We don't have 23 million extra IPv4 addresses. The pool of free addresses has been exhausted for a few years now. There are some addresses still available for service providers to use, but largely they have to figure out either how to manage their existing IPv4 pools more effectively and build a plan to move towards IPv6 because they have to support both. So what A10 does is work with service providers to try to help them figure out what the best plan is, either to conserve their existing pool with carrier grade NAT or some other mechanism, and to put a plan in place to how they can transition smoothly to IPv6, over time, when it's when it's most necessary. So IPv4, IPv6 is not a big part of the budget. It's not talked about in most of the news releases about what's happening with build outs for rural broadband, but it's something that it's kind of like nails in a house. I mean, you can have all the wonderful designs, but if you get there without the nails, it's not going to work. So it's just one of those things that needs to be addressed, needs to be planned for as we move forward.
Absolutely. It's like most things, isn't it? Having those foundation right is absolutely critical.
Yes,
and that's how I see that. It's the building block, isn't it, to enable all these other things to happen. So really, really well said. So yeah, we're making that invisible visible, one of our themes today, I think. And Chris, I'd love to bring you in at this moment now to maybe bring out some examples. So what you've seen, what you've experienced personally with respect to the pandemic's impact on the digital divide. So what has changed over this period for you?
Yeah, thank you. And look, I think Terry did a great job of outlining what some of the issues are and how A10 is trying to solve them. But I think the pandemic has really intensified our appreciation on both the opportunity side and how there is still a problem. And there is a problem in areas where there perhaps shouldn't be. As Terry said, it's not just places underserved, underdeveloped. And what we've seen through the pandemic, and probably why we've been so busy, is that people have moved their location. And so this hasn't always meant, for example, an increase in traffic, but the distribution of the traffic's changed. So people are working at home, students are at home, being homeschooled, and that's opened up a different view of this divide, because unfortunately there has been a link between poverty and connectivity. And so I think there are times and unfortunate situations where students have found themselves unable to be with the right sort of access. And so I think there's, on that side, it's identified and intensified, part of the problem. But it's also highlighted there's additional services that are critical within this core network space, and these services need to be provided. In some cases, people might argue not in the best ways. Gambling from places like home have probably increased, and services around that. Gaming, I know from personal experience that my son probably spent more time on his Xbox, during his homeschooling hours than he would have been on his Xbox at school. So I think there's been challenges across the board. And I think that, what the pandemic has shown is that it's made, as you said, something that was perhaps less visible before, very highly visible. And I think now that it is so visible, we need to do something about it. And I think there is a social and political will now, and certainly A10 is here to partner with the service providers in this regard.
Yeah, if I could just add something to what Chris is saying, also that I think that making it, I think that the pandemic has also made it really redefined what broadband is all about. So it's no longer considered a nice to have; it's considered essential. And I think that's because we all have had these very personal experiences of what life is like if we didn't have it. I mean, what would we have done during the shutdown if we didn't have our television or our Zoom calls, or in your son's case, the gaming devices to use. And so I think that's made a big difference in public awareness and desire, to fix the problem.
Absolutely. I think like anything, isn't it? When it's personal, whether it's education or health,
Yeah.
our kids, our families, it just makes such a difference. And not only has this become personal, it's become personal at scale right across the world. So
Right.
yeah, absolutely. It's heightened that attention, and it's resonated with all of us so much. So hopefully we can build, rather than that negative contagion we've had over the last few months, let's build a contagion of change, of positive change around addressing this issue. So really interesting points there as well. Thank you. I'm going to go to an audience question now that's kind of following on from this, which is looking at changing patterns of hybrid working and living.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of touched on that naturally a little bit earlier, actually, but they're basically asking, with this movement away from cities in many cases, is this good? How's this changing things in terms of traffic? And how are you addressing that from an A10 point of view? But yeah, what's the effect of kind of changing mobility on the issues we're facing at the moment?
So there's a couple things that we've noticed, in working with our service provider customers. One is that not only has the distribution of traffic changed, as Chris mentioned, but also the characteristics of the traffic itself have changed. So for service providers, they configure their networks that assuming traffic is coming from certain locations. So when traffic all of a sudden moves from the city center to more suburban areas, it's something that they can address, but they've had to scramble to kind of to augment capacity, and in our case, kind of to augment some of that carrier grade networking capacity in specific locations where they weren't expecting to have that much traffic, coming from those locations. So there's that has happened, and so I think service providers have learned that they need to be able to be more agile, and so things like edge and virtualized networks and things that help with that kind of agility probably being investigated more than maybe they might have been pre-pandemic. The other thing that happens is that the type of traffic itself is actually changing, and you can think of my own experience. I taught my family how to use Zoom. I helped my church create a streaming service. All of a sudden, it's not so much about downstream traffic that's downloading a movie or downloading a file or just streaming a cable program, but there's now a lot of upstream traffic to where it's interactive. You have video, you have conference calls, you have traffic that requires different kinds of connections, and like some network equipment, like the equipment that we sell, is more sensitive to changes in the number of sessions, per session, the number of connections coming in that are coming upstream, that is the throughput itself. And most of it's talked about in the public domain is speed and high throughput, but there's a lot of elements that also contribute to the subscriber experience of fast speed. It has to do more with latency than technically with throughput and speed itself. So the type of traffic, the timing of the traffic, with nighttime to daytime, coming from different locations, are all things that service providers have to adjust to. And we found ourselves kind of running around helping with these kind of localized augmentation of capacity or reconfiguration issues with some of our customers, just to try to meet that need and as that changed.
Fantastic. Thank you. That really puts that into perspective about what those changes are and what to look out for. And perhaps that's a good moment as well in terms of taking action, as you were mentioning at the end there, to bring Chris back in to look at some of those examples in detail about how changes have happened and how people have really stepped up to make a difference over this time. As you know, I'm very passionate about all things tech for good. And I think we've seen some great examples of service providers doing exactly that, kind of going beyond during the pandemic, but looking ahead as well. So perhaps, Chris, you could bring some examples of that to the fore.
Yeah, sure. And look, I think that, I've been in this, service provider space for quite some time now. And I think, in the most case, service providers have always stood strong to be at the forefront of trying to do what's best. I think there's been obviously numerous evolutions and the technology has changed, but, overarchingly, I do think they have the interest at heart. And we do have some great examples that either customers of ours or partners of ours have been working on. And, there's a regional service provider in the US, mainly serving Ohio and Virginia, called MCTV. They provided free internet for students during the time when, there was a homeschooling, situation, just in case there were, potentially, people that, either were unable to access or couldn't afford the extra bandwidth required. There's a service provider in Australia that carries over data. And so that if you don't use all your data in a particular month, then they'll allow that data to be used by other members of the community that perhaps need it more than it just going, to waste, so to speak. And then on a grander scale, you have some more, politically led initiatives like Project Gigabit here in the UK, where there's a huge push to make sure that small, medium businesses and households will have access to better broadband. This is serving schools, doctors' surgeries, homes alike, and we're seeing extra funding and vouchers, for people that perhaps require it in terms of allowing this broadband access. And I think one of my more favourite ones, is the work done by, a very large global SI in terms of Ericsson and what they're doing with UNICEF and identifying the connectivity gaps across 35 countries, mainly Latin America and Africa. And their goal, is very simple. It's just to, every young person to have access to information. And so, you can currently there's currently a live map that shows that, they've currently, tested the connectivity of about 930,000 schools of 6 million that they're targeted to test. And so I think these connectivity gaps, have to be identified. I can't imagine how much more difficult it would be to educate a child, without decent broadband or any at all. And so I think some of these are good examples of what we've seen, out there. And as I said at the beginning, I think the service provider community holds some responsibility and has stood up to this responsibility over time.
I would just say that in my discussions with service providers, I mean, they really have a strong sense of responsibility and I think mission, and they're excited. They're excited about getting some funding that'll allow them to better serve their customers. I mean, many of these smaller service providers, they don't have all the resources that the big companies have, but they very much want to serve their community and really focus on customer service. And I think that they're thrilled that there's more political will and funding coming their way now.
Absolutely. It's really bringing together that local and global, isn't it, in many respects, being right embedded in the heart of communities, but reaching out to serve underserved communities at the same time. I love the examples you brought to the fore there as well. I would also recommend taking a look for the audience at Connect to Learn as well. So that's one of the Ericsson examples that you mentioned there as well. It's a fantastic initiative. It's one I'm involved in personally. And I always say, education and technology go hand in hand. And here we've got education technology and we're creating empowerment at the end of the day. So really, really powerful examples. And what we'll do after the session as well, we'll share some of the examples in a bit of a post so that people can follow up and kind of look at those journeys for themselves and provide different examples in different countries as well. So there's something relevant for you all listening. So thank you for that. Appreciate that. And
Sure.
maybe it's a good moment now as well. And Terry, I'd love to bring you in on this because we spoke about this previously. We both got very passionate about this. So I'd love to kind of use one of the terms I used a lot about reframing narratives. So in terms of the digital divide, I believe in this really strongly myself. Do you think we need to desperately reframe this now? So let's not look at this as a, catching up moment. Let's look at it in a leaping ahead, a leaping forward moment, and building for that new environment. I love your take on that, Terry.
Yeah, I really believe that, and I've been to a few conferences, and you kind of read up on the on the industry publications. I mean, there's kind of a framing currently that we're helping these underserved communities catch up to where the rest of us are, and that's a little bit condescending in my opinion, because really it's an opportunity for them to leap forward. Because if you're building something new, you don't have to. It's very difficult to change something, to upgrade something while you're still serving subscribers at the same time, because you can't disrupt the service. And so to be able to have some opportunity to be greenfield or somewhat greenfield really is a chance to move forward. And I mean, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, near the heart of Silicon Valley, and I don't have fiber to the home at my home. And when it rains, I have service problems because the little areas in the street get flooded. So it really has the potential to not only give these underserved communities a chance to move forward, but to potentially change a lot of the change a lot of the social divide as well, because I think there is a movement towards people moving away from some of the urban areas. They can have a lot of long-term impacts on society. So I would encourage and challenge service providers, even though they're trying to they have these deadlines that they have to meet, and they're trying really hard to build out as quickly as possible, to take the time to look at how they can upgrade and or upgrade their core network as well, including the IPv4, IPv6 that we just talked about, and provide really what those subscribers are going to need for the future, because the landscape is changing rapidly. And the old assumptions probably aren't going to hold anymore anyway, as far as what subscribers want, what they expect. I think they may expect a lot more than what may be visible right now.
Absolutely. I'd love to bring in an audience question at this moment, if that's okay.
Sure.
A friend of mine, Mike Nash from Cornwall, UK. So again, bringing in this kind of rural element to this a little bit as well. He's asked the question. Well, he's made a statement first saying there are huge benefits to IPv6, especially with the rise in data delivery. To solve the digital divide, do you think it needs to be a private and public partnership to help address this? And I know we'll probably come on to collaboration a bit later, but I'd just love to kind of touch on that now.
Yeah, no, I think so, and I think you're right. We've seen collaboration as being absolutely critical to this, and you will see, like Project Gigabit and also C-Spire, which I think is more private led, but you will see some of these that require that sort of collaboration. I don't think it's not one of those things I don't think that can be solved just by any one organization. And if you do look at the C-Spire example, where you'll see a Facebook partnering with a Microsoft, but also some much smaller companies like an Airspan, for example, you'll see Project Gigabit is not possible without the perhaps the government funding, but also the political will. The governments need to care about this, otherwise it won't get fixed. Otherwise it would have been fixed, because it's not like we haven't had the opportunity to fix this in the past. And so I think that's one of the key, we're talking about the spotlight or invisible visible. That's one of the key factors, is that it's not really something we can hide now. I don't think anyone, as I think another person who's in this session said, I don't think anyone could argue that it's an absolute mandatory for every student to have access to the information, and the best source of information is to be connected. And so I think that I think it will depend on different situations, but there will have to be political involvement as well as private investment.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for coming back on that. And I'm going to go to you again, if that's okay, with another question that's come via Twitter, actually. And this is saying, kind of looking more micro to macro around the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals more broadly. So obviously we're focusing here on digital inclusion. But as I mentioned in the intro, there are 17 goals. They're all very interrelated. And Ruth has asked, how can we do things differently with ICTs, but particularly from a telco perspective, for sustainability and climate change more broadly? So just love your thoughts on that one, because again, I know it's something we all care about on this panel very much.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key starting points. I think we all have to have both, as individuals and corporations, we have to have the motivation. We have to have the motivation and the will, to make some change. And then I think it's using the technology in every available sector. I don't think that 30 years ago people would have thought that the agricultural industry sector could be as positively impacted by technology as it will be. And I think that from an organisation perspective, at A10 we're a part of the Responsible Business Alliance. We're working with our partners like Ericsson on the UN 1.5 degrees Celsius initiative. That's actively ongoing, at the moment. So I think, as you identified the UN agreement earlier on and the race to zero. So I think organisationally, you need to get behind the places that you work for and that you represent and encourage them to take this seriously. As individuals, we absolutely need to take it seriously. And then to be able to use the technology, there's some fantastic examples on, measuring water quality, making sure that water is of the best quality either for, consumer consumption or for other uses. And agriculture, I think, is going to be one of those key sectors which we can see some, great strides made here. The old way of watering crops was just, when and if it was available. But now we can use IoT, AI, any sort of, measurement tools to make sure that, the crops are watered as they're required, and that would make a huge difference. So I think it starts with will and motivation and extends to making sure that the technology is used best, but across every sector. Not just making sure that you can stream videos at football matches quickly. It needs to be more than that.
Absolutely. Very well said. Thank you for that. And I also think it's interesting that kind of the catalyst for innovation for this area is coming from new places as well. I was speaking to somebody yesterday about conscious consumerism. People are looking for change in this area. They're looking for transparency around it. And so this stepping up, that's a kind of a constant theme today, and what A10 are doing and some of the service providers we've mentioned as well. It's hugely important. People want to see that action, that tangible steps being taken from digital inclusion to sustainability, as we just mentioned there. So great to see that centre stage, and thank you for that question, Ruth, as well. Appreciate that. And Terry,
just to finish on that, I think if I look at my daughter as an example, the future consumer will make choices in that regard. It will absolutely be a part of how they buy, the considerations the organisations have made, and so it's not a nice to have anymore.
Absolutely. It's an imperative. I couldn't agree more. It will become, competitive strategic advantage won't be on some of the traditional things anymore. It'll go way beyond product and service. It'll be about values at the end of the day, shared values, that personal and professional alignment in our lives. People will be demanding that from who they advocate, buy from, work for. So yeah, absolutely spot on. So I think that's a very, very timely comment, Chris. Thank you. And kind of moving beyond the some of what we spoke about so far to how we resolve some of the challenges of getting there. I'd love to talk about that a little bit more now. So Terry, if I could bring you in to just reflect a little bit about the biggest use case for transitioning to IPv6 at the moment, but the challenges along the way to get there. So what's stopping, for example, some of the smaller operators doing that transition now? If we could drill into that a little bit and kind of how we can better address it, that would be fantastic.
Well, and I think the question prior kind of alluded that too, that there's many advantages to IPv6, and I don't think any service provider that you would talk to would argue with that. The issue is kind of getting from point A to point B, because the reality is that most traffic and most websites is still IPv4, and they have to manage both and they have to serve both. The most typical use case that we run into with smaller SPs is that they have an existing infrastructure that was based on IPv4, and the risk to changing something, which is, this is pretty fundamental to how the network is configured and how the routers are configured and so forth. The risk of something going wrong, if you try to make a change, is pretty high. And so the number one concern, we did a survey on this, and what's preventing you from moving your infrastructure to IPv6, and the biggest reason was the fear of disrupting service. Because if you're a network admin, your biggest nightmare is that you're going to do something. You're going to do something that you didn't know that you were doing that's going to cause an outage of some kind. So there's that concern about making that kind of a change, and there's a real lack of people that are skilled in the networking capabilities of IPv4 versus IPv6. And these are providers that, they're not huge. They don't have huge, amounts of resources. And so there's some, legitimate, genuine concern about, changing out their infrastructure. And oftentimes the customer equipment may be older. And it's costly to try to change out customer equipment as well. So there's a lot of, real legitimate things that has to be worked out. What we try to do is provide them options that allow them to kind of, do both, to provide technology that can help them with their immediate problem as well as transition, to their IPv6 goals, later on. But even the very large SPs that like mobile operators have almost all changed out their network infrastructure to IPv6, and their mobile devices get changed out much more quickly than, say, home broadband users. They still have to address the IPv4 to IPv6 connectivity, within their network. So it's kind of, until everything's 100% IPv6, it's something that operators have to address in one way or another. And there's lots of different mechanisms, but and they have to try to do that smoothly and within a budget and within a time frame that makes sense and without disrupting customer services. So that's not undoable, but it's certainly complex and challenging to address.
Excellent, thank you. And I've got a couple of other questions coming through here. So Stephen from University of Edinburgh is asking about the role of 5G in enabling inclusion, and looking at opportunities and challenges around that. So what's your take on that? What if I could bring Chris in on that one?
Yeah, no, I think that, I think as we've just been talking about, it could exacerbate it, but it also could go a long way to solving it. And I think that, as Terry mentioned before, we want to use this as an opportunity, not just to catch up, but to jump ahead. And so I think we've seen countries in the world that have done that quite effectively. I think, we talked previously, Sally, about how, South Korea had addressed, these sorts of issues, over the last, decade or two. And some of these decisions are decade kind of decisions, investment kind of decisions. So I think that, I think 5G, absolutely, it's here, it's right now. There's, hundreds of millions of subscribers currently using it. But we have to be careful that it doesn't just become something that is there for those that can, afford the latest phone, or afford the greatest broadband for their home. We need to make sure that alongside this, all of those schools that are not connected are connected, that we have ways of connecting other people through doctor surgeries, and other ways, in communities and libraries and other ways that people can get connected. So I think that, there's plenty of other technologies that are adjacent. Fixed wireless access is being used really effectively by lots of parties to ensure that, better broadband is provided. So I think that 5G is one of those enablers. We'll be talking about 6G, within the next 6 to 12 months, I'm sure. But I think we need to make sure that we aren't leaving people behind, and in fact, we give them the opportunity to jump ahead.
Exactly. And I think I'll just come in on that question, Stephen, as well, about using the example. So in terms of what we've all experienced about the pandemic, we had a great example of coming together, which was the HPC consortium. So biggest tech companies in the world, leading universities, citizen scientists, governments across different nations. And it was all that putting together that high performance computing power, that AI, machine learning talent, and the research behind it as well, putting all that together for a global shared challenge. And that obviously was the pandemic. why can't we do the same thing when it comes to digital inclusion and around sustainability too? So I think if we use that as a model, that may be a way of looking at coming together some of these challenges. And I think we'll come back to the importance of collaboration in a minute, but I wanted to bring that in because I think it's a very tangible example of what we can do and what can be done. Getting loads of questions at the minute, so I'm going to go to another one. It is from Eden, who's asked, how important do you anticipate the digital well-being of consumers? So how much attention do you give to that when embarking on digital inclusion initiatives? So Terry, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that one.
So well-being of consumers, like being telehealth kinds of applications?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, I think that's the way I read it. Yes.
So, I mean, it's one of those critical things that people now realize that can be addressed with the digital response. I mean, telehealth, working from home, even learning from home. I mean, we've all kind of learned the things that we didn't think were possible to do are now possible to do. And I think that bridging that digital divide, allowing everyone to participate in that, could also help resolve some of those inequities as well, to extend telehealth services to people that either are far away from facilities or can't physically get there for whatever reason. And I would think, I mean, this is kind of brainstorming because it's not kind of an area that that I've necessarily put a lot of study into, but I think that you would think that it would also be a more cost-effective way to provide a lot of health services, and therefore maybe it could help partially address some of the soaring healthcare costs as well. But I think it plays a vital role in trying to bridge that inequity in the U.S. and I would think around the world as well.
Yeah, I think it's
absolutely
critical, and but again, this is where you see the service providers taking a huge role. I mean, Telstra in Australia has huge initiatives around health and how they approach health for the citizens. And Australia is probably a good example because there are people that live a long way away from some essential services. But I also think we have to be a little bit careful, because I know I've had this conversation with, some of the more elder members of the community, like myself. And sometimes, although it might be more cost effective to take someone's blood pressure with a device that they're wearing, you can't take away from the fact that people do like to leave the house. And I think that also has been
see another human being occasionally.
Yeah, and that has also been highlighted through this pandemic. There's other social ramifications of being locked inside on devices the whole time. So I think it comes down to options. We need to be able to ensure that if that is the most suitable way for someone to have their blood pressure measured, then it's of course possible right now. But also that if they go to the surgery, they've also got good access to connectivity there. So I think it boils down to the choices, and it boils down to the question that was asked before from Cornwall, which is, the public and private involvement in the solution.
Absolutely. I've had a follow-up on that particular question as well around well-being, more from the understanding confidence side of you. So I think that might be more of a skills perspective that they're looking for there in terms of a question. So maybe I'll just come in on that quickly. My response to that would be the fact that absolutely, yes, we can't make assumptions either. There's terms like digital nomads, isn't there, or digital native. And I think we make that assumption that if you're kind of a childhood and beyond, that you get absolutely everything to do with technology and you're super confident about using it. There was research that came out from Liverpool University only about 3 or 4 weeks ago that was saying, quite a high percentage of people in say the age 12 to 22 age group were saying, actually, I don't feel fully equipped for future roles and things like that. So there are still gaps there. We can't make those assumptions. So investing in skills development, that data literacy alongside the technology is absolutely huge. So not only providing the accessibility to these opportunities, but also the confidence to use them as well. So that skills investment, I think, is a huge piece. So thank you for that follow-up question too. And I think we've got time for one more question, and then we'll probably move to a wrap up around some of the collaboration pieces I think have come out really strongly today. So I'm going to bring in this question from Mike Nash. Great point so far. Do you think growing cloud technology, edge processing, and effectively the emergent technology integration that we're seeing will put a greater demand on networks and apply pressure to upgrading the entire infrastructure? How is that effectively then closing the digital divide? Terry, would you like to come in on that one?
Sure. edge processing is taking the functionality that maybe is physically located in a central location and distributing it, further out, closer to the consumer. So it can have a lot of advantages as far as reducing latency, and can have some cost advantages too, depending upon the situation. I mean, a lot of the cost economics of deploying infrastructure it gets pretty complicated, pretty fast. But I think that there is certainly a place for edge technology, just kind of in concept, because it's a smaller, physical location, and so it's a smaller investment, if you will, which may be more appropriate for areas that don't have a high population density or that are further out. So, I mean, you have to kind of look at each individual case as far as what makes the most economic sense. It doesn't necessarily have to be a huge pop that you put out there, or a tower. So it can definitely, play a role in trying to reach those areas that are not reachable very economically. Now, what was the second part of the question? That I think it is.
Yeah. Looking at how that effect would be effectively that tech convergence and what role that might play around closing the digital divide.
Well, I think that service providers are moving towards a lot of new infrastructure already. I mean, they're moving towards cloud. They're looking at edge, and they're moving towards, from physical to virtualized networks, for example. So I think that's a transition that's already happening. To the extent that it can help, with the digital divide problem, I think is a bonus. But it really, the purpose behind all of those is to reduce latency, to make the network more efficient, and to help them manage and reduce their costs, and just find more cost-efficient ways to architect the network that'll meet not only the rural broadband operators, but rural broadband subscribers, but their entire subscriber base. So it's really a trend that's already in process and is being evolved, step by step. It's difficult to change out an entire network and change out an infrastructure. You have to do it very carefully, because you're basically trying to change out an engine in a plane that's flying, with passengers on board. So you can't disrupt service, and you've got to maintain the continuity and think about security and protection of that network as well. So it's a evolution that I think most operators, rightfully so, approach cautiously and with a lot of thought.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate that, Terry. And so perhaps as we come towards the end of our discussion now, we can again focus on that looking ahead and ways we can come together to make this change happen. And Chris, I'd love to bring in your perspective here. So kind of bringing to the fore what service providers can do and what's changing, what's the new model of maybe ecosystem collaboration, really, I think we're talking about here. So just like to see the developments that you're noticing at the moment and where we might go next.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's what we've effectively seen. We've just seen, much more collaboration, many more partnerships. I think that, the words like competition have been used, bandied around quite a lot. I think we do see large service providers trying to solve a problem, and smaller service providers doing more localized things. I mean, the example I gave earlier of the regional service provider servicing Ohio and Virginia, it's a family-run business. It's a small business that really has their constituents, at heart. And so I think that a lot of these can't be solved just by, one large organization like one large AT&T or one large Verizon. So I think that there absolutely is the requirement for this collaboration. And I think the political and social will, whilst we have it at the moment, so heightened and so visible, given almost every country is still dealing with the pandemic in some way, shape, or form, we should be taking this opportunity to work through some of these broader issues, because they are absolutely solvable. But I don't think any one organisation can do it on their own. And I think I used the C Spire example earlier. When you do see some huge organisations who are teaming together, the example that you used before around high performance compute, I think that what this current situation that we're in has made people realize is if we do come together, we can actually solve some pretty big problems. And I think that needs to continue. And I think that it's incumbent on large organizations and to partner accordingly.
Absolutely. We've shown the art of the possible in many ways, haven't we? I think so. Yeah, definitely. I think that collaboration is key. Could not agree more strongly. And so, on that note, perhaps we can just share like a final point between you about what your top tip would be to the audience around moving ahead on this IPv6 journey, and maybe to Terry first.
Yeah. Well, so I think the important thing for operators now that are looking at being involved in the rural broadband initiatives and expanding their network is to really take a careful evaluation of not just the IPv6 issue, but just kind of in general what their core network can offer. Because I think the landscape is changing a lot, and the expectations of subscribers has changed in, let's say, the last couple of years of what they expect from availability, from security, from the types of services that they want to offer. So I would encourage them to really take a hard look at what their underlying assumptions are in terms of their subscriber needs, and therefore the traffic requirements that they will be needing to meet, as well as the security mechanisms that they have in place. Because really, this is the time when you're expanding to kind of relook the IPv4, IPv6 plan if you don't have a plan to get one, and overall the efficiency of the core network as well. It's not all about access and throughput, even though that's where most of the media attention is focused on. But it is an opportunity to upgrade that network, to step up to not only what you knew that they needed and didn't have, but what they could need, down the road. You think about how much when the smartphone came out with 3G, how much that just changed so many things, and there was a lot of applications and use cases that people just didn't expect to happen, and many service providers were kind of caught off guard because they didn't expect the kind of transaction that types of traffic. So I think this is another opportunity that things may change a lot, and to do the best you can to kind of rethink what those future needs will be so that you can help build a better future, not just try to fix the problems of the past.
Very well said. Thank you, Terry. And Chris, I'd love your views. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think, in addition to what Terry just said, this problem is not going away, and it can serve multiple constituents. It can really solve a problem, for the future, but it can also serve some of those communities, economic communities that could do with some extra help. So I think the final thought I would say is, for organizations to absolutely consider this, the problem isn't going away, to partner accordingly, make some good choices with respect to partnerships and consortiums, and let's use this as an opportunity to jump ahead.
Absolutely. Brilliantly put both. Thank you so much. And we're still getting questions coming through. So what I'm going to do after the event as well, just collate a few more of these so we can follow up individually with people as well, because it's really gauged a lot of interest, which is fantastic. So it's kind of over to me. I could love to speak about this all day because it's a subject very close to heart. But thank you so much, Chris and Terry and A10, for really helping to shine a light on this. I hope we really have helped to, as we said at the beginning, kind of make the invisible visible with our discussion today. I think it's hugely important. We've got some key themes I think have come out, and when it comes to digital divide, it's not about catching up, it's this jump ahead, what we mentioned a few times. We have this social and political will at the moment to build shared value for business and society. Let's galvanize that, let's create that contagion of change, and let's build on this heightened focus that we've had from the pandemic to really sustain change that can help bridge the divide. And again, this role of connectivity, the role of infrastructure, and the role of the journey to IPv6 to help achieve that. I think we can see how much that matters from everything we've talked about today. And that final point is really, let's not go alone, let's go together, because that's the way to make change happen, and that's certainly the way to make change scale. So thank you both so much for your time. Thanks so much for all the fantastic questions as well, and again, we'll follow up on that and we'll share some of the use cases we've talked about today as well, so that you can individually look at those stories and see what is being done, and hopefully that will create more interest as well about what you can do too with your organization. So thank you so much for everyone's time today, and we look forward to joining you soon. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much. Good to see you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care, everyone. Speak soon.
Bye.
Bye.